Welcome to the ultimate guide on mastering After Effects shapes. In this lesson, I'll teach you how to create these 3 animations using just shapes. Firstly, we will start with this 3D coffee cup animation. Then, we will cover this emoji magnifying glass animation. And finally, we will go over an interactive planet shape animation. By watching this entire video, you will master After Effects shapes, meaning you can charge a lot higher prices for your edits because they will seem so much more expensive. I suggest you put away all distractions and focus for the next 3 effects because you are about to master After Effects shapes. Let's move on to the first effect, which is the 3D coffee cup animation. And remember, what you're seeing on screen right now was entirely done just with shapes. Right, so we will start by creating a circle. So I'll change the fill color to black, go up here to the circle tool and click and hold to create a circle. Now I'm going to unlink the universal scale from this shape layer, meaning we can separate the width and the height of the circle. And I'm just going to bring in the height of the circle just like so. So we're left with this ellipse shape, and I'm going to duplicate that, hold shift and bring it down to the bottom, and I'll make it a bit smaller so we can basically create the outline of the cup. Now what I'm going to do is click on shape 2 and just call it bottom, just make sure you stay organized, and call the top on top. Okay, then I'm going to change the fill color to red and do a rough sketch of the outline of the cup, but I'm only going to do the left side and put it underneath the top and call that mid. Now I'm going to press Option Space to bring up console effects, type in mirror, and we're going to mirror the middle just like so. And then we're going to have to move the bottom keyframe so that it actually mirrors. Nice. Now let's just put the mid down the bottom so that the 2 circles are above it. Open up the scale and bring the scale to 0 so that we basically hide the circle. You might kind of be able to see where this is going, but let's just play around with the top circle and then bring it in like so. And now add a fill effect. Again, if you don't know what I'm doing, Option Space brings up FX Console, which is a plugin for After Effects where you don't need to have the Effects tab in the top window. Real quick, all of the assets, projects and scripts are going to be linked below in the MM Bootcamp. But anyway, we're going to go and change the fill color over here to red so that as it disappears, it flips and becomes red. Okay, and now for the bottom, again, we're going to take that scale, create a keyframe over here, and I'm going to quickly open up the top keyframes just so I can find the same frame at which they switch. Then I'm going to bring that keyframe to 0. Now what I'm basically trying to do here is I'm trying to give the illusion of a 3D layer with just using 2D shapes. So now, as you can see, by simply changing the top color and changing the scale height, it makes it look like the cup is sort of like rotating, you know? Cool. Now let's select the keyframe for the path. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring it up just a little bit to the middle here. Then go back to the start and use the Convert Vertex tool, kind of like so. And because we added the mirror effect to it, you can see I only need to change one side. So I'm basically saving myself a lot of effort here. I'm just going to play around with this just a little bit, just to kind of get like a smooth ellipse down the bottom here. And there we go. This already looks nice. We have this 3D effect all by just changing some keyframes around. This might be obvious, but make sure you keep all the keyframes in line just so that they're all in sync, because if the bottom is moving faster than the top, it's going to look really ugly for you and it's not going to work out. Okay, so what we're going to do next is select the top and create a new composition, and we'll just call this top matte, and then we'll paste in the top in this separate composition. Go back, and we're also going to pre-compose all of these 3 layers and call this cup. Now we're going to basically import the top matte pre-composition in the coffee animation, aka the main composition, and we're going to give it a fill effect and change the fill to green. Now we're going to parent that to the cup, and we're going to open up time remap on both of these and add keyframes at the start and the end, and then easy ease those keyframes. Then what we can do is just extend the ending like so that it's basically quick at the start and very slow to get to the very end of it. Even faster, just like that. Then we're going to go into the cup composition, and what we're going to do is actually extend the duration a bit, just like that. Now go back to the coffee animation, and we're also going to extend the top composition just like so. Now we're going to go back to the coffee animation and extend our pre-composition right here. And let's just play around with the time remap just a little bit and bring it down to the center like so. And again, let's smoothen out these keyframes just like so. Okay, let's speed it up a bit just so we can see what we're working with faster. Speed up even more, just center that a little bit better. Okay, now let's scale it down just a little bit and add a position keyframe and position it just a little bit lower so it basically goes up and it goes down. Now what we're doing here, just like we did earlier, is match the keyframes to each other so that the position and time remap keyframes are working together. And so by the end, it drops down like so. Okay, and at the very end, we're also going to add a little bit bounce animation by playing around with the keyframes like so. Now we can select all of them, ease them, and separate dimensions. Although I'm not sure if we're going to end up using this, but what we can do now is smoothen out these keyframes and bring it to the end like so. And let me just rewatch this start again. Okay, so you can see where this is going. We have the bounce animation. We also added a bit of a 3D effect. Now what we're going to do is add a little bit of a rotation. And since we have the cup pre-composed, we don't need to worry about moving every single layer individually. So let's go here, let's smoothen out this graph a little bit. Same for the other side. Let's see what this looks like. And add a motion blur. So now it looks like someone threw the coffee cup in the air, it slowed down a bit, and it slams down with a nice little bounce effect. By the way, keep in mind, this effect is still the very first one, and it's very basic. The other two I'll show you later in this video are really insane, and you'll be shocked at just what kind of effects you can do by just using shape layers in After Effects. Look, I know we all hate when YouTubers self-promote. However, if you made it this far, then I do think you're going to enjoy the Bootcamp. Inside, I have made so many guides about landing $2,000 clients, Premiere Pro basics, After Effects basics, how to use AI as a video editor, all of my assets, all the websites I use, and direct calls with me as a video editor, as well as a bunch more stuff. But look, if you do want to find out more, just click the link down below and take a look at the video that you're seeing on screen right now. We're also just going to change the rotation like so, to add a bit more variety to it. And again, play around with the graph a little bit, because changing these arrows around makes a huge difference in the way the effect is presented. And the reason I wanted this rotation is because I want to show off how nice the coffee animation will be inside of the cup later on. Okay, so we want to just play around with these a little bit differently, because we want to speed up the rotation in the middle, and then let's slow down. Again, guys, this is super important you get this right, so let's actually change it around and make it even quicker like so. Bring that arrow down, a bit too much. We do want some sort of smoothness. What if we do like a linear one? That looks nice, maybe a little bit less on the arrows. Okay, this looks smooth. Nice. Now we're gonna create another shape layer, and we're just gonna create a brown circle up here to indicate the coffee. This is going to be the coffee that's actually inside of the cup with real water physics. And what we're gonna then do is change the back to be some sort of a gray color like so, maybe a little bit brighter, just like that. And then we're going to position the coffee in the middle of the cup, center the anchor point, and track mat it to the top ellipse. So now what we're going to do is parent the shape layer to the cup, so that if the cup moves, the coffee moves with it. And again, we need to go back to the original layer and set key points at the same times as the rotation happens and the time remap happens in the other layers. So like so, and we can also increase the size over here. And once again, what we can do is ease them all. And like always, play around with the keyframes to smoothen these transitions out a bit. And let's see what this looks like. It's looking nice, especially with the rotation. We're giving it some real life physics. However, obviously we'll touch it up and make it a lot better. Let's just play around with the keyframes just a little bit more. What we are now going to do is change the color of the inside of the cup. See that delay in the rotation of the coffee makes it look really nice. But now what we're going to do is open up all the keyframes of the cup and change the position like so that's a bit slower. And let's also remove one of the keyframes. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, this might look a lot nicer. So that it's not overspilling, right? It looks like it's actually inside the cup. Okay, so what we can do now is add a wave warp effect to the coffee inside the cup. And let's choose the wave height now. Obviously this looks a bit spiky, but if we increase the width, we're starting to see where this is going. Let's increase that width a little bit more. And let's change it like so to the same color as the background. And now what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer. And we're going to change the color just so that we can see this duplicated coffee. And we're going to bring that down just ever so slightly. And now we're going to change around the wave height of the second duplicated layer. Bring it down a bit. And change the fill color to something a little bit different than the original one, just so that we can actually distinguish the difference. And now let's see what this looks like. Okay, let's bring both of the coffees down just ever so slightly. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to zoom into the coffee cup and start creating our little additional details. So as you can see, I'm going to try to create a coffee droplet with the same color as the coffee that's inside, and stretch up path and add a keyframe for the path. Now add motion blur and parent it to the cup so that it moves with the cup. Let's see what it looks like. And just position it a little bit lower just so that it's on the cup. And now as the cup goes down and slams against the so-called floor, this water droplet animation is going to start. So let's zoom in a bit, and now let's change its path to shrink as the coffee cup goes back up, basically as it bounces. Looks good. Now we make another shape. Okay, it looks good. Now let's make another circle over here, again with the same color, and let's time that so that it starts as the cup bounces, and again parent it to the cup, of course. And let's have this go way out, position it up there, and then bring it back inside like this for the start, and then back inside again, and position that underneath the cup so that it actually disappears. Easy ease these keyframes, of course. And we can separate dimensions since we're just working with the Y dimensions here. Smoothing out the keyframes as usual. And now it's a bit too high and a bit too quick, so we're going to separate out the Y and add turbulent displace, and go into evolution and add time times 20 expression. There we go. That looks a lot better. This just gives it a bit more physics to the water droplet. I'm going to change up the amount and the size of it. Okay, that looks a lot nicer now with the few effects we have going on. Nice, nice, nice. Let's just time it, the drop, and let's see what it looks like. Nice. Let's just change it so that it doesn't go as high, of course. And let's give it a bit more real life physics so that the droplet doesn't drop as fast. Or you know what? Let's bring it all in so that it's all a bit quicker maybe. And this will also match the same. Yeah, let's bring it way lower. And now what we're going to do is duplicate this coffee layer, this coffee droplet, and change the X position, change the Y position, and maybe make it a bit smaller in scale. Okay, and now we have two different water droplets from the bounce. Let's just change the scale a little bit so that's way less noticeable. Okay, so all I did there is just add a floor to this effect. And now what we're going to do is we're going to basically parent an ellipse to the floor and add a fast box blur, make it horizontal, make the second one vertical, and let's just add some sort of a blur to this floor. We don't even want a floor, to be honest. We just want a very subtle ground for the coffee cup to land on, basically, so that it has, of course, some more physics, and like so. That looks good. Now what we're going to do is select the floor, move it down to the very bottom so that it's behind this, and there we go. We have a nice floor that the cup lands on. Now what we're going to do is parent the two floors to each other so we can move the position around a bit so that basically the floor comes up as the coffee cup comes in. We're going to go to speed graph and again play around with the speed graph a bit. That's of course a bit too quick, so we're going to separate these out a little bit. We're going to now create a new null object, and we're going to parent the floor to this null object. The reason being is because we want to scale out of everything, and since everything in the cup layer is parented to the cup and the two floors are parented to shape layer 7, if we scale out, everything zooms out with it. That's easy as that. And let's speed it up at the very start over here so that it kind of zooms in and then the floor comes up just like so, and then it keeps zooming for a little bit longer. What we need to do here is basically just sync everything up together so that it all flows smoothly, because it feels just a bit disconnected right now. That's the biggest problem. Okay, that's a lot nicer actually. I'm just basically fading it in as the null zooms in. So now let's pre-compose absolutely everything over here, and let's add a posturized time and change that to 16 frame rate. Then add a bit of a noise on top of that, maybe 2%. Okay, now we're going to import a grain on top of everything as a texture, and we're going to change it to overlay. Actually, no, we're going to change, and we're going to create a solid gray white kind of color over here. Add that as a background, and now the grain is a bit better because we added the white background. So yeah, the grain is one of my favorite textures, especially to use in talking head videos and talking head video animations. It gives it that extra high quality feel. And there we go. We have a nice effect, all made basically by shapes and obviously some texture layers. But I think this is very nice. We have a realistic water animation, we have a bounce effect on a cup, we have a solid floor coming in, playing around with null layers, and it also looks pretty 3D. And again, all made by shape layers. So that was just the first animation, but trust me, things are about to get a lot crazier. This second animation is the magnifying glass animation. And remember, all of this was done with just shapes. So let's get into it. To start, we're obviously going to make a new composition and call it main comp. Then we're going to create a new solid and make it somewhat peach. Go up here to the ellipse tool, select a solid fill color, and create a circle. This is going to be our character. So we're going to rename this face. Click on the ellipse tool again, and now we're going to get a rounded rectangle. Let's just create that to the side so we can actually see it, change up the roundness and change up the size. And we're going to position that on the face. This is going to be the eye of the emoji. So we're going to want to position that somewhere where an eye would be. Duplicate it, and now we have two eyes. Change the fill of them to red and position them somewhat like this. So now we have an outline of the face. Now what we need to do is create the mouth. Now real quick, most of you guys are not subscribed. So if you want to see more high quality editing animations, just click that subscribe button. And now let's get back to the video. So now let's create another rectangle just down here. Position it above the eyes so that we have this kind of unibrow. Let's just unlink the size and reposition the eyes so that they're a little bit smaller. Let's rename this left eye and rename this right eye. Remember, stay organized, guys. It's going to pay off in the long run. Now this can be eyebrow, and let's just position the eyes so that they're a little bit centered. Let's zoom in and see what this looks like. Okay, now let's create the eyeballs. So obviously make it black, position it in the middle. Let's change the position of the anchor point to the center, duplicate it and move it to the right. Okay, now what I'm going to do is position the anchor point in the center of the forehead so that I can move it left and right. Okay, let's click on the left eye, duplicate it, and now we have a mouth. Let's position that down here and call it mouth. And let's change up the size of it just like so. Turn off the fill and let's add a white stroke. Now, if you want to find out exactly where the center is, you can turn on the grid so that we can get an even stroke line over here. Increase the size of it so that now we're actually adding some sort of detail to our lips. Okay, this is how it's looking right now. Not too bad. Now let's select the background of the face and change the color of it. Let's make it orange, maybe a bit brighter. Now let's click on the two eyes, change the color of them as well, obviously to white, unibrow black, and lips to white. Now what we can do is change the line in the lips to black, call that mouth line, and there we have it. So far, guys, looking pretty nice. Let's duplicate the face and call this face shading. Now what we can do is change from orange to a sort of more peachy color, like so. But if we mask it out like this, we can add a feather to it then and make a nice shading on the right hand side over here. There we go. Let's just position that over the original face. So we have face shading right. Now over here we have face shading left. And again, let's do the same thing. Let's change up the color, make it a bit peachy. Let's make it actually red. Now remember, don't change this too much, and again, don't forget to turn on the mask rather than the fill. But again, you don't want to change the color too much. As you can see, this is a very slight tint that I'm doing over here. So it goes from like orange to red to peach. It's a subtle difference, as you can see. But this gives it a much higher quality. Now you might be wondering, could I not just add a gradient? Sure, you can do whatever you want. There's a million different ways that you can create the same effect in After Effects. Now let's create a rim light for this face. So again, I made a whiter sort of peach. We're going to do a rough outline of the face like so, just like on the right side over here, because again, we want to basically have real life lighting. If you have a light on the right hand side, the left hand side will be darker, of course. That's why we added a peach to the right and a dimly lit red on the left. But this looks very nice. Now let's duplicate the eyebrow to create some eyebrow shading. We're going to go from a black to orange-ish color. And again, we're going to do a sort of little diagonal cut like so, and add a massive feather to that. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, now let's create another rectangle up here. Let's turn off the stroke. Let's just have a fill, and I'll call this eyelids. Now what we can do is select the right and left eye, duplicate it, position it over there, and let's pre-compose these and call these eyelid matte. Okay, so we have our eyelid matte, we have our track matte, and there we go. So as you can see now, by duplicating the eyes and creating a matte for them, we now have an eyelid which we can customize. Okay, and again, let's get a dark gray color over here, and let's change it to dark gray, maybe a bit lighter, and call it eyelid shading. And let's make it orange, similar to the orange we have on the face. Select the mask, and now if we cut it in half like this, and then add a feather to it, we can see the nice texture we just made. Now let's just make the eyelid a bit darker. There we go, that looks much nicer. Click on the eye and duplicate them. And again, we're going to create a shadow frame. And again, we're going to create a shadow frame. We're going to make them orange, select the mask and let's do something like this so that they're orange slightly from the right hand side. Let's turn on the opacity this a bit because we don't want the eyes to be too orangey, but that looks much nicer. And now we duplicated the mouth, and once again we're going to do a mouth shading right. Let's just select fill and make it orange, of course. And you can see I'm just doing this by guessing what kind of orange I want to use. I'm not using the same orange for every single one. You just have to have that bit of taste, you know. Of course, increase the feather, duplicate it, and let's do one for the left hand side now as well. Let's just reposition the mask like so and make it very subtle and turn down the feather a little bit. Okay, looks nice. Now let's basically pre-compose everything so that we have an annoyed face. There we go. Now let's make that a bit smaller. Let's click inside of it and make it transparent too. Okay, so let's track matte the iris to the eyelid matte. Let's do a keyframe for the position to move to the left. And as you can see, the right eye is a little bit off, so let's just adjust that a slight bit. Now what we can do is adjust the shading, move it about 1 second forward, and that's how it's going to look. So it's basically going to move to the left, give it a little side eye every second or so, and 2 seconds in it's going to go to the right, kind of like this, and then about another second in it's going to go back to the left, and about another second in it's going to go to the center. Nice. Now let's ease them, separate dimensions, select all the Y positions, remove them, and ease the X positions. Now, of course, we're going to smoothen out these a little bit. You can use plugins like Flow if you want, but it's always best to learn how to use the graph editor manually. Okay, this looks good. Nice, so it looks left, looks right, and I'm back in the middle. Now let's parent the eyelid shading to the eyelid so that when the eyelid moves, the shading doesn't stay in the same place. Let's select the position keyframe, move the eyelids up, but so that they're a little bit visible still, like so. And again, graph editor, let's move them around a little bit, smoothen them out so that the eyelids close. It goes left, closes a little bit, goes right, closes, and goes to the middle and finishes off. So far so good. Now let's parent the eyebrow shading to the eyebrow as well. And now we're going to move the eyebrow around. So let's start up high and move down low. Very simple, easy ease. Of course, separate dimensions and smoothen them out a little bit, and let's remove the X position since we don't want that to move. Let's see what this looks like. So I think this could be a bit higher, and it can fully drop a little bit later, like so. Let's just smoothen that out a little bit. Let's see what this looks like now. Okay, so that should be our face done. So now what we can start doing is duplicating them and positioning them where we want them to be. So of course, if you select a grid, you can position them to be a bit more centered. So I think that looks good. Now we can turn off the proportional grid and again, duplicate them all and then position them a bit lower. Duplicate them again, move them down to the bottom, position them lower once again. Now what we can do is position them a little bit higher because they're a little bit off. But I think there's one unselected here. Okay, there we go. So now this looks pretty centered. Let's just let it render. Okay, let's create a new composition called Magnifying Glass. We can make this 800 by 800. And of course, given the theme of this video, we are going to make it all by just using shapes. So let's go up here to the ellipse tool and let's create our circle. Let's make it have a white stroke like so and turn off the fill. Let's increase the stroke size. And now what we can do is add a rectangle like so. And instead of a stroke, we're going to have a white fill. Okay, nice. Now let's make this a bit smaller. Okay, so you can see where this is going. We're just trying to add the shape of a magnifying glass here. Let's create another rounded rectangle. This will be sort of the holding part of the magnifying glass like so. And let's unlink the size proportions and make it a bit smaller like so. Cool. Let's change the anchor point positions to be up here. And let's parent the shape layer 3 to shape layer 2 so that the holding is nice and together. Let's reposition that. Okay, let's parent everything together again and let's rename this stuff so that we don't get confused. Let's call it circle, handle, and base. Okay, now we can reposition them. And now if we move the handle, because we added the anchor point like so, that means we can rotate it however we want, which is nice. Okay, so now we can reposition the handle for the magnifying glass as so, because we have changed the anchor point. Now let's duplicate the circle, call this shading, and I think you see where this is going. We're going to change the color to something like yellow, select the mask tool, and once again, From the right hand side, we're going to create a sort of yellow mask and add a lot of feather to that. Basically trying to dilute it even more because it's still pretty obvious. Something like this, maybe a bit less. And let's duplicate that and create a L and R, meaning left and right. Now let's reposition the mask over here like so. And let's change the color of it slightly so that it's more orange on the right. Okay, it looks nice. Now let's select the handle, duplicate it. Let's do some handle shading as well. Change that to orange, split it in half, and add a feather. Same thing for the base. Again, duplicate, color shading, select the mask, and split it in half. And add a feather, of course. Okay, now let's go back into the main composition and add this magnifying glass in there. The only problem is that we can barely see it because they're colors. So let's change up the base to make it a bit darker. Same thing for the handle, let's make it darker rather than lighter. And of course the circle. This should actually make it stand out a bit more because, yeah, that's a lot better now. Because obviously, if it was so light, it just doesn't stand out on the background. Now what we can do is position the anchor point like so. Let's turn on motion blur for all of them as well and create an adjustment layer. And this is going to be magnify, basically an effect that we're going to add. So again, if you have FX console, you can press Option Space and type in magnify to get that effect. Okay, and position that inside the magnifying glass and increase the size. We now have a magnifying glass effect on an adjustment layer. So now what we need to do is just parent that to the magnifying glass. So open up magnify and parent the center of the magnify effect to the magnifying glass. So now if we move the magnifying glass, as you can see, we have a magnify effect. Let's just turn down the magnification just a little bit. And okay, let's position it out of frame, then it goes into frame. So let's maybe make that centered, then it goes up here to the left. So it's kind of looking for the happy dude. So then it goes down, or maybe down here. And then let's change up the rotation a little bit as well, so it rotates around. And remember, because we set the anchor point on the handles correctly earlier, we can now afford to play around with rotation super easily, you know. As always, of course, we can play around with the easy ease graph. We're just looking to smooth these all out. Let's maybe remove them and bring them a little bit closer to each other so that we can have one more just up here. And that will be the top right dude. That'll be the happy dude. Now we can actually change the path of it like this by using the convert vertex tool rather than the normal pen tool. So now that just gives it a bit more fluid motion because it looked a bit rigid with the straight lines. It's a very nice touch. Okay, now let's duplicate the annoyed face composition and call this cool guy face. Now this guy is going to be green, maybe like so. And of course, since we have so much shading, we're gonna have to change up all the colors around. Let's make it a bit more green though. And again, I'm just gonna change every single shading on every single layer so that it fits the new green aesthetic. Okay, now what we're gonna do is change the eyebrow so that it's a bit smaller on the sides like this. Let's maybe change the rotation like so, because we are changing the entire face around. We're not just, yeah, let's remove the eyelids like that because we don't need them, and you'll see why in just a moment. Okay, so now what we can do is duplicate the eyebrow like so. Let's move them around like this. Basically, I'm just customizing the look of this because I'm trying to give him sunglasses and just make him look like a cool dude, you know? Change them to green, move his eyebrows around, and now we're gonna give him glasses. Okay, we can duplicate that rectangle, make it a bit bigger so that it fits the entire eyes. Let's maybe make them a bit rounder, like 36. And of course we need to match that on the left one. Let's call that glasses, duplicate that, and now we can do a glasses shading on the right hand side. So what we're gonna do here is change up the color ever so slightly to a darker green. Select the mask, of course. And what I want you to understand is the main principles, right? It's not just the fact that now you know how to do this shading. It's also the fact that you know you should keep natural light. You should make the light sort of similar to each other. You know, we're not doing a pink color here. We're doing just a different shade of green so that it kind of suits the vibe we're going for. So understand lighting, understand positioning by keeping stuff symmetrical, and just follow physics, you know. You don't want to have unnatural light, even in an animation. There's a lot of principles that you need to follow in animation to make it look super realistic, you know, such as anticipation, for example, which I, of course, cover in Demo Bootcamp. But anyway, now we're going to create a few more rectangles over here. You'll see why in just a moment. We'll call them reflections and turn on the motion blur for them. Now what I just done there is duplicate the glasses and created a track matte layer so that we can track matte the reflections onto the glasses. Okay, I forgot to remove the mask, which is why that wasn't working. So now if we go back and we track matte that, there we go. Of course, let's change the rotation a little bit and let's change the opacity to be a little bit dimmer. So yeah, that looks nice. Position over here, set that to the start, and then we can have that kind of pan across. Of course, easy ease them and then change the speed graph so that's kind of fast in the middle. Let's maybe increase the opacity a bit more so that we can see it. Now we're going to add some eyebrow shading. So of course, duplicate the eyebrows, and I think by now you know how to do some shading. So let's make it diagonal like this, add a bit of feather, and you kind of just want to be creative with it as well, you know. Okay, now what we're going to do is just change the position of the eyebrows like we did in the first face animation. So we're going to raise them up a bit like this, select them, add easy ease, and then obviously change up the speed and stuff. So he kind of raises his eyebrows as the shine comes through on the glasses like so. And that looks pretty nice. I mean, you can see the level of detail that you can get with just using shapes. Okay, it's starting to look very nice. So the eyebrows lift and then obviously we drop them back down. Let's just parent the glasses shading to the glasses. And as he raises the eyebrows, the glasses go up as well. Then as he drops them, they go back down, kind of like this. So we're basically just following the movement of the eyebrows, but with the glasses. Okay, now we can change the speed graph. Okay, you know what? Now what we're going to do is actually change up the mouth. So rather than this smiley face that we had, I'll create a much better mouth like this. Kind of like give it a semicircle vibe over here so that he's very smiley. Fill it in with black, and then we can add a white outline to it, kind of like this. So we have mouth matte. Okay, now what we can do is import that cool guy into our main composition, and over here we can just turn down the opacity so we can see the back character, so we can basically scale the two to be the same size. Okay, that is kind of good. Now we can turn the opacity on again. And what we want to do is basically reveal this cool guy as the magnifying glass goes over them. So I'll create a green shape layer over here to fit just inside of this, and then parent that to the magnifying glass and call this matte. Now what we can do is turn up the opacity, and now turn on the motion blur and track matte our character to the matte. So as you can see, the matte now disappeared, and anytime we hover over, our guy will appear. It's a super smart tactic. So now the magnifying glass goes around and reveals our cool character animation. This looks really, really smooth, guys. And again, this was made with just using shapes and After Effects. Now, even though that effect was really sick, we are moving on to the third and final effect, which is the best one out of them all. And this effect is going to be the reactive planet effect. Now, what you're seeing isn't just an animation. We're actually using After Effects scripts to have the shapes and objects react to each other. And again, this was all done with just using shapes. So for the third effect, we are of course going to start off by creating a new composition and a white solid in the background. Now we need our shape. So let's go over here to fill, and let's create some sort of a purple shape for the planet. Again, as I said earlier, you can use whatever you want. We're going to use a gradient this time. And let's just rotate the gradient like so. Change it so that it's a lot less subtle. And again, if you remember, last time we done completely different shading. This time we're going to use the gradient because, as I said, there's many different ways to get the same output in After Effects. Now let's go to composition settings and actually call this I. And this is not going to need to be that big. 800 by 800 is fine because this is going to be a separate layer. So again, white background just so that we can see what we're doing. Let's turn on the grid. And let's go from gradient to fill so that we can create a white eye. And using the grid, we can now see and make this pretty even, right? So there we go. That's one side done. And that's the second side done. We're just doing the outline of the eye right now. And now let's change the composition to black so that we can see a bit better. Let's turn off the grid. Okay, the outline is looking nice, but we can extend it a little bit. Just play around with it until you got what you want. Cool. Now let's turn on motion blur, rename this to eye. Now let's get a blue color so that we have the eyeball inside. Turn on motion blur again. Now let's create another circle inside of this circle, again on the same shape layer. Let's open it up and change the fill color to black. Now let's make another tiny little circle inside of the shape up here, just like so, and change this to white. Now let's lower the opacity of this a little bit so that it's not in your face so much. And call this the eyeball. Cool, this looks nice. Now let's select the eye and duplicate it, because now what we're going to do is basically track matte the eyeball to the eye, and so that the eye basically doesn't leave if we move the position around. Now let's select the eye, open up scale, and open up scale on eye 2 as well, unlink the properties and create a keyframe. So what we're doing now is we're basically going to close and open the eye, so that if we select them to 0, and let's just add easy ease real quick, you'll see what I mean. They close and they open just by unlinking the eye properties, and there we go. And basically changing the scale. Now let's make this a bit faster. Nice, there we go. Now what we can do is go back to the main comp, create a new null object, call this null, duplicate that, and call this controller. Now what we can do is add slider controller onto the controller, and we can rename this to distance. Okay, let's duplicate that, rename this to strength, then go back on the circle, open up position, and now alt click the position keyframe so that we can import this script. Again, all these scripts are going to be in the MM Bootcamp, but if you want, feel free to screenshot these, by the way. I'm not just trying to hide these behind a paywall. If you want them, just screenshot them, import that screenshot into ChatGPT and tell ChatGPT to transcribe this, and then you have the After Effects scripts. But again, all of these, along with the project files, blah, 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 in the MM Bootcamp, it's just much more convenient. By the way, it's super important you name these exactly how I did. Distance, strength, null, and controller. We're importing an After Effects script, which is very important that you name them exactly how we did. Otherwise, the script won't work. Now, by the way, I used some of these scripts from other YouTubers, so I'm going to credit them in the description. But going back to the edit, we now have this script on the position on the circle. However, something is not working. But what we can do, all we got to do is screenshot this, and then go to ChatGPT and simply say, fix this script, please. Paste in the script, and then it says the error message, blah, blah, is likely caused by. Okay, if we're curious, we can read about that, but we're not. We just want the script. Okay, so now with the script fully working, we can click on controller and increase the slider to 400 and increase the strength to 100. So now with the controller, if we bring that closer to the object, you can see it's reacting to the shape. There we go, that's super cool. So now let's open up the eye, import it onto this composition, make it a bit smaller, and we are going to have our planet right here. Turn on motion blur, let's position that just a little bit higher. And then we're going to duplicate the strength, open up circle position, and copy the expression from the circle position and paste it onto the eye. Call that strength 2. Now the difference is that we're going to call this strength 2 because, as you've seen a while ago in the controller, I called it strength 2. Now I know that we could just parent the eye to the shape. However, if we change the strength and just use the same expression, we can have the eye reacting to the null differently so that it feels a lot more live-like, I guess. So let's go back to the controller and let's decrease the strength because it was reacting a bit too much. So there we go. As you can see, the eye is sort of following the null now. If we just decrease it a little bit more, maybe to 160, then it should be good. Now let's open up the white composition and create a red solid and track matte that to the eye. Now let's create a mask over here and make the background red like so. Just to kind of give it that slight red tint. There we go. Because I thought that the white was just standing out a bit too much. That just looks a lot nicer now. Now let's click on controller. Let's go to strength and distance and duplicate them. Now we're going to call these distance time and strength time. Okay. Now let's open up time remap and paste in another expression. Now basically what this is going to do is allow us to paste this script into the eye under time remap. And now as the null gets closer, the eye is going to open, as you can see. Guys, expressions are very underrated in After Effects. You need to use them a lot more. Now with ChatGPT and with O3 and all these powerful models, you can actually customize them to your own liking, and you don't need to be able to code to create them, right? So now let's just change the position of the null to kind of go from here to here. Then we'll do another position to go way up here, and another one sort of like this. Sort of a triangle that's kind of reacting to it. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to create a black circle over here, turn on motion blur as always, and parent that to the null. Now we're going to add vertex tool, and we're basically going to click and hold on this null so that it doesn't go in straight lines. So now this should go around like so. Okay, but it didn't react that much, probably because it's a bit too far from the eye. There we go. Just bring it in a little bit closer from all sides. And let's bring these lines in a little bit so that it just looks like a bit smoother. Okay, this should be good. Okay, it's a bit quick and it's still a bit all over the place. So let's just turn down the strength 2 so that the eye actually doesn't move out of the planet. It's still slightly moving out, so we need to change that up. So what we can do is position that a bit more centered. Yeah, there we go. Rather than changing the strength, we can just change the position. Okay, now the eye is following the ball and the planet is sort of moving away from it, so that's cool. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to paste in just the eyeball into our main composition, because the problem right now is that the eyeball isn't following the ball. The eye is sort of following it, but again, we want to add that attention to detail. So what we need to do now, open up position, open up the controller, create a strength tree. Then what we're going to have to do is customize this expression to include a strength tree. Now we're going to copy expression, paste it onto the eyeball, and call this strength tree. Now what we need to do is duplicate the eye and track map the eyeball to the eye. Then let's just go into the eyeball and disable it so that basically when the eyeball moves, there's not a second eyeball behind it. Okay, I can barely see if the eyeball is moving, to be honest. Might be a little subtle. So let's open up the position of the circle now. So let's click on the circle and let's create a inner shadow. Open up inner shadow and let's change it from black to white-ish. Let's increase the distance. Okay, let's just play around with this a little bit more. Size, the opacity, and now we're going to open up the angle and paste in this script. Again, the credit for these scripts is going to be linked below. Okay, now, the eyeball is slightly moving, by the way. We can't have it moving too much, but also the lighting is now moving as well. Okay, let's open up the inner shadow again, and now let's click on opacity and paste in this script on opacity, so that when the ball gets closer, as you can see, the opacity increases, meaning if it's far away, it decreases, obviously. But just as a reminder, this isn't how it's going to look. This animation is going to look so much nicer. And that's because we're going to change this black circle to a star, meaning this light is actually going to make sense. But anyway, now what we're going to do is create a new solid over here and a new composition, call this stars. Now just add the CC particle world effect, because we're going to add some stars to this. And let's change up the settings just like I'm going to do it real quick right now. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to add stars. You could add them in manually as well. But what we're trying to do here is just speed up our workflow and add a bunch of stars all in at once. So change them around however you like. I'm going to do it like so. I'm going to increase the longevity so that they don't disappear as quick. Let's see how this looks. Okay, let's import them onto our composition, put them behind everything else. Add a time stretch effect. Okay, this looks nice. It's very subtle and we are going to change it up a lot. So don't worry about that yet, but this is looking very nice. And I know it's black, stars should be white, but again, we're going to change everything, don't worry guys. Let's pre-compose everything now and increase the scale. So it basically zooms out, and now let's just play around with the motion graphics. So now it's zoomed in, it zooms out, and the animation happens. This is all starting to shape together. Now let's zoom it back in and add a quick zoom over here and add another zoom out and zoom back out at the end. So now I'll come here, I'll zoom in, follow that a little bit and stay zoomed in. Nice. Let's open up the main pre-comp now. Click on stars and let's invert that so that we get white stars and a black background. Now what we can do is change the ball to white and add a deep glow effect. You should definitely get deep glow, by the way. Turn down the exposure, open up circle and go into layer styles, inner shadow, and let's change it to screen opacity so that it looks a bit brighter. Click on the color and make it even brighter because we have a black background now, so we want it to stand out. And let's play around with the distance a bit and play around with the size, because we're just trying to make it a lot more obvious now that the star is what is causing that light. Let's change the blend mode though. So as you can see, everything is reacting to each other because of these After Effects scripts. And keep in mind guys, we're only using shapes right now. Let's decrease the ball size by a little bit, by a lot actually. And let's open up the eye again. So if we click on the red solid, we can actually increase the opacity so that it's like a lot more obvious that the planet has bloodshot eyes. Nice. Nice, this is looking super smooth. We have the opening and closing of the eye, we have everything where we need it to be, but I think we should just play around with the graphs a little bit so that we have better and smoother animations over here, because the zoom-ins were a bit drastic. This looks nicer though. Okay, let's open up the ball, add the pucker and bloat effect and minus 69 on that, because we're trying to create a star, not just a ball. And we can also change around the scale, so as it goes in, it'll scale up a little bit, then it'll scale back down. Ease them all, of course. Play around with the graph as always. This looks very nice. Now let's go over to the scale again and add this expression, loop out. It's a bit jarring. And let's trim that comp because we don't need it to be that long. Okay, let's go back and let's have it zoom in from the very start, like so. So it's basically starting from the planet. So it's like zooming out, flying out of the planet, nice. I'm just gonna play around with all these scales a little bit. Okay, now what we're gonna do is go back to the controller. We're just trying to tweak up these settings a little bit. I think the distance time is a bit too little, so we wanna have a smoother eye opening. Yeah, that looks nicer. Let's decrease the strength. Okay, we need to open up the null again and drag it out of frame because the last frame wasn't dragged correctly. So it needs to finish out of frame pretty much. And let's change around the easy graph so that it speeds up at the very end. So it's slow, it's on screen for a little bit longer, maybe make it a bit bigger. And you know what, let's have it drag it out like this. So it's a bit longer of a scale out, a bit longer of an animation. I think it's too drastic. So zoom out, slow zoom in, and let's open up the controller again. Change that to 400. No, that was way too little. 500 would be better. Okay, so it sort of blinks in the middle as well. That's kind of cool. I like that. What we're going to do though is zoom back in at the very end so that it almost loops. Let's copy the same easy ease as the start. So I'll zoom in and out. There we go. Now we have a loop animation as well. So it'll blink, it'll go out, zoom in, and zoom back out. But all we're going to do is move the last keyframe back a bit, I think, because I don't like how fast the loop is. It still feels a bit rigid. So let's move that back and let's see what this looks like. So zoom in, zoom back out. Nice looped transition for this. Blink as well. This looks very nice. Let's create an adjustment layer. And now what we can do is add optics compensation and increase the FOV. So as you can see, it has that nice sort of distilled illusion effect. But now what I can do is open up the stars, click on the black solid and increase the birth size because the stars were looking a bit small. See the way they move from right to left, it just makes it look like this planet is actually traveling through space. Let's add a bit of noise, maybe like 3%, something very subtle. Okay, now what we're going to do is open up the star and change around the scale of things. Basically, if we open up the expression of the star and add plus a value, we can make the star a lot bigger. It's a quick trick for you guys who wanted to ever change the scale of stuff, but you couldn't because of the expression. So now, you see what I'm trying to do here? I'm trying to have the star come into the camera like so, but obviously the eye is kind of overlapping it. We'll fix that in just a moment. But I think this is just a nicer looking transition. Again, let's customize the easies so that it speeds up at the end, because that's just like a nicer way to transition. It should speed up as it gets closer to the camera. And let's just position the star over the eyes so that the eyes disappear, maybe over the eyeball as well. Again, it should just make sense in the real world. If something is getting closer to the camera and is traveling at the same velocity, it typically speeds up. But cool. Now what we're going to do is create a white solid at the very end because of the glitch over here. So now zoom in and there we go. That fixes the kind of weird glitch we were seeing there in the top left. Let's duplicate the circle now, have circle 3, and now select the opacity. Because basically we're going to increase the opacity in circle 3 and we're also going to change up the size in a moment so that it sort of covers the entire planet as the star appears to be bigger. So we're going to increase the distance here and increase the size a bit. So this way the planet gets filled with light as the star is kind of, it's a lot less visible, but comes in. And there we have it. This is what the animation came out to look like. I think it looks amazing. It's super smooth. And I think that sort of warp effect around the camera made it so much nicer, especially with the zoom out, you zoom back in. Once again, if you are interested in becoming a full-time video editor and learning how to make your edits more expensive, just check out the MM Bootcamp, a link is down below. But another free alternative is just checking out more of my videos. There'll be a video on screen right now which will teach you a bunch more tricks. And if you want to see and be recommended more high quality editing videos in the future, then just subscribe. With that being said, thank you for watching and have a great day.